All right, now that we've done a quick review of motor theory, common pilot and primary hardware devices, and discussed closed-loop control at an introductory level, let's take a look at a simplified representation of the primary schematic for a yaw system. Again, primary is the high-power portion of a system that actually does the work. Often yaw systems use more than one motor, where the number of motors are reflective of a given turbine's mass and the size of the motors employed. You might expect anywhere from 4 to 8 yaw motors on a modern industrial wind turbine. The primary schematic shows one manual motor starter, feeding 4 separate circuits, one for each motor, that are essentially duplicates of one another. Each individual motor shows another manual motor starter, in series with a pair of contactors and an overload relay. You'll note the branching arrangement. If a technician was to manually open the furthest upstream manual motor starter, labeled yaw system, all motors in the yaw system would be disabled. This would be helpful if one needed to perform some service or repair on the entire yaw system. If, however, the upstream yaw system manual motor starter was closed, a technician could selectively disable individual yaw motors in the system by opening that particular manual motor starter. For example, if a technician needed to work on yaw motor 2 and motor 2 only, they would open up yaw motor 2 manual motor starter and disable yaw motor 2 only, thus allowing the remaining 3 yaw motors to continue to function as intended. While we're on the topic of selectively de-energizing smaller subsystems of a larger system, can 3 yaw motors do the task originally intended for 4? Maybe yes, maybe no. Depending upon the design philosophy of a particular wind turbine manufacturer, there's often a significant safety factor built into the sizing of components that comprise it. This being said, with 3 motors left to perform a task originally intended for 4, you would expect the remaining 3 motors to draw more current and exert more power than normal. If this unequal work-sharing arrangement was to continue for any length of time, you might expect the 3 remaining motors to not last as long. Continuing downstream from each individual manual motor starter, we see a pair of contactors that make or break connection to primary voltage. Since each individual yaw system is identical, let's just zoom in on the primary schematic for yaw motor 1. Yaw motors 2, 3, and 4, and for that matter 5, 6, 7, and 8, would repeat this same connection. You will note that when the clockwise contactor closes, it applies phase sequence L1, L2, L3 to the squirrel cage induction motor such that it turns clockwise. Whereas when the counterclockwise contactor closes, it applies phase sequence L2, L1, L3 to the squirrel cage induction motor such that it turns counterclockwise. This is obviously a paired reversing contactor arrangement, and most likely the system includes mechanical and electrical interlocks to prevent simultaneous closure of both the clockwise and counterclockwise contactors. You'll recall we examined reversing motor starters extensively in the Reversing Motor Starters with Interlocks lecture, available at the Big Bad Tech channel. In this lecture, we learned that simultaneous closure of both the clockwise and counterclockwise contactors allows phase L1 and L2 to smash headfirst into each other with no current controlling element between and can yield an arc flash hotter than the sun. This is to be prevented at all costs. For this reason, a mechanical interlock prevents the simultaneous physical closure of the clockwise and counterclockwise contactors. Oftentimes, paired reversing contactors will be mounted side by side inside an electrical enclosure, and the mechanical interlock takes the form of an accessory device mounted in between or on top of the paired reversing contactors such that it sticks a wedge or some other physical obstruction into one contactor assembly should the other close and vice versa. An electrical interlock, in contrast, appears inside the pilot system and prevents the coils of the opposite contactor from being energized when the first is energized and vice versa. For example, when the clockwise coil is energized in rung 1, the associated normally closed clockwise 1 contact in rung 3 opens and prevents the counterclockwise coil from being energized. Using this double layer of protection, mechanical and electrical, ensures that neither a faulty control system nor any manual override would ever inadvertently simultaneously close both the clockwise and counterclockwise contactors. The yaw motor primary schematic additionally features an overload element in series with the motor. You'll recall an overload is a sensory device that protects the motor from sustained high current conditions. At the rated conditions and less, the overload does nothing. If, however, there's some issue with the yaw system, perhaps lack of lubrication, shaft misalignment, there's a loss of a single phase, or perhaps the brakes are still on, we'll talk about this possibility in a bit, or some other issue, current will rise above the rated value and the overload will begin a countdown. Once the countdown expires, the overload says, "Shut it down," and sends a signal to the controller. the controller opens the contactor and the motor stops. As we'll soon learn, some controllers can take additional steps during overloads and other errors. Before we take a look at the pilot level, you'll note the larger primary circuit necessitates each individual motor circuit handle the current for that individual motor, whereas the furthest upstream yaw system manual motor starter must handle all power for all of the yaw system. Presuming each motor draws a rated current of, let's say, 4 amps, the upstream yaw system manual motor starter must handle 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 4 or 16 amps. Long story short, each manual motor starter, contactor, and overload needs to be appropriately sized and set for the conditions it is intended to handle, and any mistake in sizing or setting can result in failure or nuisance tripping. So while we've got this primary schematic up here, now I said at the beginning of this lecture I wasn't going to go down the rabbit hole of discussing manufacturer-specific implementations, but when have I ever been consistent and prone to telling the truth? So if you will, follow me down the rabbit hole of manufacturer-specific implementations for one moment. There exists an extremely common wind turbine platform that is a slightly different primary schematic than the representation I've illustrated in this lecture. You might run across it one day. Actually, you will run across it someday, so I feel obligated to flash it up here real quick. This being said, it kind of does the same thing as we previously discussed, only in a slightly different manner. You know, rather than including a paired reversing contactor arrangement for every single motor, this particular implementation uses a single paired reversing contactor that makes and breaks connection to all yaw motors simultaneously. It makes sense, because when you want the turbine yaw clockwise, you want all motors going clockwise and vice versa. In this implementation, you can still de-energize the complete yaw circuit using the upstream manual motor starter, and you can still selectively de-energize individual motors using their particular manual motor starter. What you gain is a simplified control circuit because there'll be only a single pair of contactor coils, one clockwise and one counterclockwise, but what you lose is the ability for the control system to selectively energize individual motors, which again isn't ordinarily done on a regular basis. Be on the lookout for different manufacturer implementations that kind of do the same thing as discussed in this lecture. Moving on. All right, now let's take a look at the pilot level schematic. This is low power control voltage. As I stated at the beginning of this lecture, this is by necessity a simplification and includes the bare minimum necessary to run the yaw system. Maybe not even that much. We'll see. Here I've illustrated a PLC with inputs on the left and outputs on the right. As previously, let's concern ourselves with just the pilot level devices necessary to control yaw motor 1. Yaw motors 2, 3, and 4, and for that matter 5, 6, 7, and 8 would essentially be repeats of this same setup. The most essential outputs of the interest for the yaw motor 1 are the coils for the clockwise and counterclockwise contactors and outputs Q1 and Q2. These coils are in series with the normally closed overload contact associated with yaw motor 1. When Q1 is energized, yaw motor 1 clockwise contactor closes and the yaw motor 1 turns clockwise. Presuming the rest of the motors follow this same pattern, all the motors energize and the turbine turns clockwise. Conversely, when Q2 is energized, yaw motor 1 counterclockwise contactor closes and yaw motor 1 turns counterclockwise. Presuming the rest of the motors follow this same pattern, all the motors energize and the turbine turns counterclockwise. You note the dashed mechanical interlock between the clockwise and counterclockwise coils. As we discussed previously, the simultaneous closure of both the clockwise and counterclockwise contactors is the worst of worst ideas, and the mechanical interlock physically forces one contactor open when the other is closed and vice versa. You will additionally note if the yaw motor experiences an overload in either clockwise or counterclockwise mode, the normally closed overload contact in series opens. It prevents either coil from being energized. This hardwired connection between a coil and normally closed overload contact ensures the overload has the last say about whether a particular motor is energized or not. You may or may not see this level of redundancy in a real-world implementation, but in my personal experience, it is most wise to include it. Additionally, since the yaw system also needs to interact with the yaw brakes, there's outputs for Sol 1 and Sol 2 on Q3 and Q4. You'll recall we discussed the operation of the yaw brakes in the aforementioned wind turbine hydraulic systems, yaw and rotor brakes lecture, available at the Big Bad Tech channel. Here's the primary hydraulic schematic for the business end of the yaw brakes, utilizing a pair of hydraulically extended, spring-retracted, single-acting cylinders connected in parallel inside a fixed caliper. On the input side, looks like the yaw controller has a couple digital and analog inputs. On the digital side, it looks like there's a limit switch labeled twist. A normally open pressure switch, PSY, measuring pressure at the yaw brake. A normally open auxiliary contact associated with a clockwise contactor, and a normally open auxiliary contact associated with a counterclockwise contactor. On the analog side, it looks like there's inputs for the wind vane, the anemometer, and the rotary encoder measuring the position of the nacelle. Internal to the PLC, stored in memory, would be a software-generated twist count showing the number of full revolutions from the cumulative rotary encoder data. We'll discuss how this software-generated twist count value is used later on. A more robust industrial scale system might include additional temperature sensors, current sensors, and other accessory safety and performance monitoring inputs and outputs that might trigger other systems in the turbine or react to error conditions. Let's now discuss how the controller uses this hardware setup to implement automatic yaw control of the turbine without need of human supervision. Oftentimes, the programmed instructions utilized by a turbine controller are written in some programming language recognizable by a PLC, normally relay ladder logic, or if you're in a country with a functional democracy and healthcare system, structured text, sequential function charts, and/or function block diagrams. To further complicate matters, you may find certain subsystems or subroutines within a larger controller program implemented in one style, and other systems or subroutines implemented in another. Additionally, you may find older wind turbine controllers implemented entirely in hardwire or relay-based ladder logic. It is not my intention in this lecture to examine program-specific implementations of yaw control, but rather keep this discussion limited to a general description of the decisions made by the controller when tasked with yawing from one location to the next. On a basic level, while in automatic mode, the yaw system necessitates a wind turbine know where the wind is coming from, where it is pointed at, and a means of effectively closing the distance between the two. Additionally, it needs to make basic decisions about when to start tracking the wind, when to stop tracking the wind, and what to do in the event of an emergency or error condition. Let's first discuss how the yaw system determines in which direction to rotate and by how much. One of the most fundamental inputs to a yaw system is the wind vane, which, if you recall, is an instrument that measures the direction from which the wind is blowing. The wind catches the rudder blade of the wind vane and makes it rotate from some pre-assigned home position, such that an encoder at the base quantizes this rotational angle from the home position and sends this data to the control system. In summary, a wind vane lets a turbine know if it's pointed straight into the wind like you want, or if the wind is hitting from the side, back, or some other suboptimal angle. Consider the mounting location of a wind vane, ordinarily at the top of the nacelle, and consider several nacelle orientations and wind direction scenarios. See if you notice any commonalities. So we're on the same page. Let's consider clockwise rotation positive and counterclockwise rotation negative. Scenario 1, the turbine is facing west, 270 degrees, and the wind is coming from the west, 270 degrees. The wind vane flags straight back from its home position. Scenario 2, the wind turbine is facing west again, and the wind is coming from the north. The wind vane flags north to south, effectively displaced positive 90 degrees from its home position. Scenario 3, the turbine is still facing west, only this time the wind is coming from the east. The wind vane flags east to west, effectively displaced 180 degrees from its home position. You could easily consider this positive or negative 180 degrees. Finally, the turbine is still facing west and the wind's coming from the south. The wind vane flags south to north, effectively displaced negative 90 degrees from its home position. Notice anything? One more set of 4 scenarios to make sure you're seeing the same thing I'm seeing. For the heck of it, let's say the turbine is pointing southeast this time. The turbine is facing southeast 135 degrees, and the wind is coming from the southeast 135 degrees. Wind vane flags straight back from its home position. Next one, the turbine is still facing southeast, only this time the wind is coming from the southwest. The wind vane is displaced positive 90 degrees from its home position. Next, the turbine is still facing southeast, and the wind's coming from the northwest. The wind vane is displaced 180 degrees from its home position. Finally, the turbine is still pointing southeast, only this time the wind is coming from the northeast. The wind vane is effectively displaced negative 90 degrees from its home position. You note in all of these scenarios, regardless of turbine orientation or wind direction, the wind vane directly generates the error necessary for closed-loop control. I say again, the wind vane directly generates error. do we need to know the turbine's orientation? Not really. Do we need to know the wind's direction? Not really. The wind vane directly generates the difference between them. This being said, both properties can be measured and or calculated, and they might be nice to know, as we'll see in a bit. However, for the purposes of determining in which direction to yaw, and by how much, the wind vane alone is sufficient for this task. For example, with a turbine pointed west and the wind coming from the west, the wind vane flags straight back from the home position with 0-degree deviation. Similarly, with the turbine pointed southeast and the wind coming from the southeast, the wind vane flags straight back from the home position with 0-degree deviation. In these scenarios, the wind vane demonstrates the turbine is properly oriented into the wind and there's no need to yaw because the error is 0. For the second scenarios, with the wind turbine pointed west and the wind coming from the north, the wind vane is displaced positive 90 degrees from the home position. Similarly, with the turbine pointed southeast and the wind coming from the southwest, the wind vane is displaced positive 90 degrees. In both these scenarios, the wind vane demonstrates the turbine is 90 degrees to the left of the wind, and it needs to turn 90 degrees to the right, i.e. positive 90 degrees clockwise. Sticking with these two scenarios, if the system were to energize the yaw motors clockwise, the nacelle would begin a slow crawl clockwise. When the turbine initially pointing west reached northwest, the wind vane would be displaced 45 degrees from its home position, indicating there's still an error of 45 degrees, so keep turning clockwise. Similarly, when the turbine initially pointing southeast reached south, the wind vane would flag 45 degrees back from its home position, indicating there's 45 degrees yet to go, so continue turning clockwise. Eventually, both these systems, in different initial orientations, continue turning clockwise until the error signal directly generated by the wind vane gets less and less and less, and eventually reaches 0. At this point, the wind vane indicates the turbine points into the wind, in the first scenario north, and the second southwest, at which point the yaw motors are de-energized and the brakes applied. Without belaboring the point, you find similar behavior for the remaining scenarios. Larger point being, the wind vane directly generates the error signal necessary for closed-loop control without the turbine needing to know orientation, calculate wind direction, and then compare the two. This being said, it still might be nice to know where a turbine is pointed and how many turns in one direction it's made since getting there.